Hello everybody, welcome to the Chronicles of Bandlewood event preview video. I am ImpetuousPanda, of course, and I'm joined by the one and only memer streamer, FreshLobster. Lobster, how are you?
Doing great. Can't believe the event is finally happening again. It's been way too long, but yeah, it's nice to have it be a regular thing, and it's actually one of the events I look forward to the most each year because it is very competitive. All the teams are great, and they play plenty of games. We have enough of a sample size to actually see which deck or which team outperforms the other teams in group stages. It's it's a great competitive event. I love it.
As you can see by our faces, it is pretty, maybe not early in the morning, but it is, morning, which is not when we usually do content, at least for me, so bear with our faces if possible. Like Lobster said, I think the event is very, very cool, of course, that you master the whole format, and also coming from Worlds and seeing the meta there and the decks used, I think I am extremely excited to see what a 7-deck lineup looks like for all these different teams. I think the variety is very high. We will see, obviously, Draven Scion and Zoinami and all the typical, usual suspects, but also I think there's a chance for a lot of wacky stuff like Zoe Heimer and Ezreal Shellfolk to really find a place in terms of the matchups and kind of the strategy overall for different teams. So very excited for that. We are going to go through every single group in this tournament, go over the players in each group, the countries, of course, in each group, give our predictions, and at the end, also go over the most decks used to climb by each player during the last week of the qualification period, just to go over kind of what players thought were the strongest, because obviously if you're using it to climb last week, then you're pretty sure that's the strongest possible deck to climb with because you want to qualify. So some interesting data there, and then we'll talk about the tournament meta that we expect, or kind of big players and kind of the general strategies we might see come into play for that. So without further ado, let's move into group group A. Lobster, your camera has apparently
No.
fucked up. Maybe if you restart OBS, or I'm not sure if it's your internet. It's fine here, so we can go back here until you fix it. Just maybe restart OBS.
All right, I restart OBS.
All right. Now you're gone here as well. We don't have you anywhere, Lobster. Let's go to Group A. While Lobster tries to get back to us, I'm going to go over the different countries and the players here that you guys are seeing, and then I'll ask Lobster his opinion on what he's thinking here. So we're going to go into Germany in Group A. As the number one seed, we have Teddy, we have Kobachi, and we have Kurashi. Teddy came back as a captain. Kobachi and Kurashi were not here for the last edition of EU Masters, so it is going to be a new adventure for them. We have Greece, also the first time they qualified to EU Masters. Your back, Lobster, well done. We have Metal Rider, Red Naxel, and Lunimus. Greece was barely not making it into the last EU Masters. It was the UK that won a game with Gems, and then Greece didn't make it. So finally they are in and they have qualified. Then we have Czechia with the Dream Team once again assembled: Badge Attack, Thomas, and Pokervac. Not much more to say about them. Badge Attack is a World's top 16 player and is in very hot form. And then obviously Thomas, last seasonal winner, or fourth seasonal winner in EU Master in EU, and Pokervac, number one to Masters every single fucking season apparently. So very strong player. And then we have Belarus, which are more unknown. We have Grinix, Stratos, and the name's Ephemeron, but he goes by Fima. That he's a streamer, and that's his main name. So we'll go with Fima for this video as well. Lobster, right away, going into this group, what are your thoughts on just these countries and these players?
All right, I have some personal experience with all of these players. I know almost all of the players from either ladder or the tournament circuits. Of course, Germany, not only biased because it's the country I'm from, but I do believe it has always been the strongest region, maybe the strongest country. On average, there's so much competition, so many high-ranked players, not just quality of players, also quantity of players. It's incredibly tough to get into the top 3 in Germany. As you can see, there are a lot of players still left out that just couldn't make it, that were around 400, 500 LP, would have also deserved to be there. But we know Teddy for a long time. He's been crushing the ladder, has been holding rank 1 and rank 2s at the same time for a while with his Smurf. Teddy Smurf, obviously. And Kwabachi also has a second place in season and has been in the grassroots tournament scene since literally day one, since the beta. And Kurashi also has been a bit on and off. I'm happy to see him make an appearance, a high ladder finish in this team. Probably the freshest of the 3 in this team, but overall a super stacked team. I think it's a very well-deserved number 1 seed and going into this tournament as one of the favorites. Greece is a bit more of a wild card. Metal F Rider, I mainly know from laddering. Redneck Cell, also consistent high ladder finishes. I've also played against him in the World's Championship, so some tournament, like qualifiers rather. So there's some tournament experience there for sure. And Luna and Mosa I don't quite know as well. With this team, it looks super solid. I'm not sure if they have the wealth of tournament experience, though, that, for example, Czechia or Germany do have. Do you have any opinions on that, Panda?
I think, like you mentioned, Greece and Belarus are both in a position where maybe there's a player, like we're seeing here with Belarus, where Grinix really grinded and qualified the country, but then the rest of the team didn't really grind that much, and they might have never grinded that much in terms of getting to 500 LPs or getting that high up. So these are teams that, again, like Lebanon, last tournament might be carried by one player, and then the rest are just kind of part of the mix because they're in Masters as well. So I just think looking at the group, like you mentioned, it's looking pretty polarized in terms of Greece and Czechia can be like number one and number two in the whole tournament, basically almost as favorites, and then Germany and Czechia, and then Greece and Belarus are just kind of gonna have to really surprise us. That being said, Germany did not make it a top 8 last tournament. They were in a group with Lebanon, they were in a group with Turkey, and Turkey and Lebanon took number 1 and number 2 spots, knocking Germany out in the process, and Italy as well, I believe it was. So we might look at this just from a name perspective, just from a prestige or what these guys have accomplished already. But EU Masters, I've learned it very quickly. Anything can happen. We saw France go like 0-5 or 0-6 as well. Like, just weird shit happens in this kind of format for some reason. And obviously every player that's made it here has, to some degree, at least one superstar player on their team, or maybe just all three of them don't have the ladder experience, but they still know the game in and out, and they can still obviously perform very well.
Absolutely agreed. Yeah, what strikes me especially about Czechia is that all three of them are both tournament and ladder experts. It's a very well-balanced team. They have experience and they have the skills. I'll say right away, like, I do think Germany is the favorite and Czechia a second favorite. Maybe the other way around. But
before we go into predictions,
okay,
let me whip out my high-level live editing skills and bring out the prediction emotes. So, Lobster, who is number 1 in this group for you?
I go with Germany because of a bit of country bias. It could easily be Czechia as well.
Boom.
I think they're in about a similar power level, but I go with Germany first.
Germany gets a vote. Who's the second one for you, Lobster?
It's going to be Czechia.
It's going to be Czechia. So, number 2, Czechia. I'm going to go with number 1, Czechia. We can't really differentiate this with the emotes the way we're doing it, but, you can't have it all. And number 2, Germany as well. So I think we're pretty lopsided here in terms of who we're voting for to win this group or to qualify the top 8. I think, this is one of the more clear-cut ones if you're looking at just stats and numbers and expectations. Although, of course, like I've mentioned, EU Masters is always full of surprises in deck building and lineups and in player and group and country performance. We've seen a lot of surprises before. Spain didn't make it out of groups last. France didn't make it out. Germany didn't make it out. So 3 of I think maybe the 3 favorites last EU Masters, none of them made it to top 8. So again, a lot of things can happen here, but if you go by stats, if you go by accomplishments and just overall expectations, I think it's clear cut that one, Czechia and Germany, maybe 1 and 2 or 2 and 1, depends on the order, but I think both are the favorites to make it out here.
I absolutely agree. We do have to give props to the other 2 countries, though. I think Belarus we haven't talked about much yet, but Grinix is actually a top-tier tournament player. He just hasn't played much in the Western tournaments. I once competed in a Russian tournament. I have some Russian roots, familiar with the language, and it was an interesting experience because I realized that they kind of have their own tournament circuit that is a bit separated from the Western world, and we saw that last tournament a bit with the CIS countries, as in Ukraine and Russia and
Latvia.
I think that was Latvia, exactly, that they came very well prepared, although we as Western players haven't heard that much about those players. So Grinix is one I actually faced in the grand finals of that Russian tournament, and he did win against me, and I did feel like he was playing at the peak level, like a world-class level. Definitely solid. Stratos God has also been around tournament circuits, especially on the Russian side, as well as a common name in ladder and grassroots tournament. So definitely don't count them out by any means. Lots of experience there as well. FIMA I'm not too familiar with, but both Greece and Belarus have an interesting mix. Both of them are kind of wildcard countries, I would say.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I also, know the same players that just from ladder, from tournaments, from seeing the names, just in general the past year and a half. But also FEMA and Lunimus are two names that I don't know very well, but they can be surprises, of course. And yeah, overall, I think that this group we've stated everything. I think Czechia going into it is going to be very interesting to watch them play, because it's once again this dream team from the first EU Masters, a team that performed really well with Pokravac as kind of this guy that's very heavy on like matchup tables and analysis and preparation in terms of the pure stats. He takes that to the next level. I think Bajatak is just intuitive play, and all this, he's leveled up in the past year. He's a better player than he was before, and maybe even the best player in this team now, which I would have always given the title to Pokravac. But just Bajatak has been on an absolute tear, and in terms of just pure talent, I think Bajatak might be that guy. And Thomas is a seasonal winner, so I mean, this might be the most stacked and best team, not just in terms of talent, in terms of names, but also in terms of individual performance, in terms of big tournament performance, and in terms of a team performance, where we've already seen them be really good deck builders, really good at this format in specific. And I think maybe my favorite country to win it all, even definitely top 3. So a pretty stacked, in a polarized way, Group A for sure. But let's move on now to Group B, Lobster, if you're ready.
I agree. Just one question. The one question that remains about Czechia is that will determine their success is, have they practiced their high five?
I knew you were going to ask that the moment you started. And let's hope that they have, because I think resist. It's a good luck for them. Going into Group B, we have now Poland, Italy, Belgium, and Sweden. For Poland, we have Shihu, we have Shogopass, and we don't have Alan because he was passed. It was just very vicious. These top 3 Polish players were in the top 8 of Europe, so it was just extremely vicious at the end. And we have Żółw Lamparty, which means turtle in Polish. I am in Warsaw, as you guys know, so I'm learning some Polish, and that's an animal that I know, actually. It is a hard word to pronounce, though, but I think I got it right. If not, we'll figure it out for the event. Then we have Italy with Broken Ball. The team captain in this time. He was in the first EU Masters, but not the second. So he's making a return here. Italy had a bad showing, like I mentioned before, not qualifying out of that Group A in the last EU Masters. So Broken Ball trying to change that, I think. And one of the more known and experienced Italian players for sure. So happy to see him making it back in. And then we have Stai Positivo and Doc Mick, which are 2 players that I know obviously the names from ladder and stuff, but they haven't had that enormous showing in EU Masters or in seasonals or in big tournaments before. Belgium, we have Ultraman and Shuki, 2 fantastic Belgian players that have, I think, qualified to every single EU Masters with Belgium, and obviously big names on seasonals and ladder, and overall just 2 superstar players for sure. And then we have Red Winter, who's someone that was in the World qualifiers. He's someone that does some write-ups on Reddit as well. He's a name that I've seen on ladder since beta phase, but hasn't had that extremely high success rate like I'm talking about. Just mainstay names like Broken Ball, like Ultraman, like Shihu, for example. But still, obviously a very good player. Then we have Sweden. Sweden, as you guys are seeing here, is missing their superstar team captain, Salty Simon, who was in the last edition of EU Masters and just a very strong ladder player and seasonal player and fight night player, just a player that has a lot of experience in tournaments. Didn't make it here. I think he was busy playing Hearthstone, I believe, or just not trying to qualify. But instead, it was Aaron who's coming in as a team captain this time around. A Lee Sin player that I've seen on ladder, got very high LP very early on, and qualified Sweden pretty easily. And then I'm So Humble and Pyrox, 2 obviously pretty known names on ladder. Not, again, they haven't translated the success to tournaments on the big stage or winning seasonals or getting top 4 or top 8, but still names that have been around for a long time and definitely experienced Runeterra players in general. Lobster, I want to go over just your thoughts when you see this group, just initial thoughts.
It's an interesting one because I think Sweden, although they have a very high LP finish in Aaron, I think they're definitely going to take the underdog role. The other 3 are very evenly matched, I feel like, at least on a tournament level. Although Belgium does fall behind a bit looking at average LP and rankings and so on, I do think, especially Ultraman and Shoki, have that EU Masters experience. They're very comfortable with the format. Red Winter as well has been a top 4 in the first season in Europe, if I recall correctly. So might bring us some new, fresh wind to the table, basically, some new ideas. Italy does lack some of the common names that we have usually always seen, like Meliadoro, like Soul, like Bulat, and so on. But also some new names, which I mainly know from ladder and Stay Positivo and Dogmake. But I think Broken Ball will tie it together very well. He is super tournament experienced and does have access to a lot of resources because he preps with a lot of different people. I think he's very well known in the European community, and he can definitely get a lot of input from a lot of different sources. Poland is going to be an interesting one this time around. And I think you agree that last time Alan definitely did have something like a captain role. I think he called a lot of the shots in both lineup building and piloting. And it's going to be interesting to see if this is like they did get to third place last time, which is a huge accomplishment. It's going to be interesting to see how this affects this team this time around. If they're going to be a bit more lost, maybe, or if it's going to be more evened out, right? If maybe all of them kind of get their input together and kind of everyone puts their strengths into the team's effort, and maybe they'll even outperform themselves from last time.
As you're saying, I think both Sweden and Poland are missing their key kind of team captain from past EU Masters, a player that, for better or for worse, is very executes well on the decisions that they make. I think the leadership kind of role, and maybe too much of a leadership role in some cases, but still something that I think you need in any kind of team. I haven't played obviously in EU Masters myself, so I can't 100% say this is how it is, but I think you always need that guy that executes on the decisions, that says this is how we do things, and makes the final decision when everyone else might be doubting or might be kind of in limbo, let's say, in that process. So yeah, we'll see how Sweden and Poland both missing this key role, and Alan for Poland and Salty Simon for Sweden. We'll see how they bounce into this format. Maybe it's better. Maybe now it's like more cohesive. Maybe everyone's on the same page, and it's kind of a more positive environment. Especially for Sweden, I think, speaking to I'm So Humble, you didn't say this directly, but I think he kind of alluded to this maybe being the case, with now everything being more peaceful with their preparation. But yeah, we'll see if that's a good or bad thing. But I was a bit distracted while you were speaking before Lobster, because I was confirming this, because I'm like, wait a minute. This is actually the almost exact same group as the last EU Masters, switching out Italy instead of France. And this was the group of death back then, and True. I think it's still the group of death here. And going off of what happened in that EU Masters, weirdly enough, France went like 0-6. And Poland and Belgium cemented themselves as, I think, the best prep teams in terms of lineups, in terms of deck strategy. We saw Poland, obviously, with the pretty novel strategy of having the double Zoe decks and forcing opponents to... There was a meta where it was obviously the Watcher and Azarelia, so you would force ban on these decks, and then have two very strong decks that you knew the champion wouldn't be banned. If they were banned, you're baiting the other teams into allowing one of the big three to go through with Threshmaster's, Watcher, and Azarelia. So overall, I think Belgium and Poland proved themselves going to top 8 last EU Masters, not allowing Sweden and France to go through, winning that group of death, let's say, and also proving to be some of the best strategic countries in terms of not just the play style and all this, but also just strategy overall. I think definitely the two best ones. So yeah, I think we can go into predictions now. Lobster, I will once again bring to the world Demos. Lobster, who is number one in this group for you?
It's a tough call, but I go with my heart. I go with Poland. I think they might still be riding the high. Poland is, of course, the best region in the world, as we have all learned in recent interviews. Shihu, number 3 at the World Championship. And I think they might synergize really well, because Shihu has more of this inventive control play style. Jolf, whatever you can say the name, Lamparchi has a bit more of the aggro brain. And Shogo Pass plays this, for example, Draven Caitlyn, Draven Ezreal, Noxus PNZ archetype almost to perfection, like these mid-rangey decks that can be both reactive and proactive. I think we have a lot of experts here. I hope they are not burnt out from Worlds qualifiers and so on, but rather have renewed energy from the success there. And if that is the case, I will say Poland takes number 1. For number 2, it's incredibly hard. I could almost flip a coin between Italy and Belgium in my eyes. I will go with Belgium here. I do think the previous tournament experience can translate very well. I think they also were inventive, they were creative, it paid off, but they did make a fatal mistake in their top 8 match, because they over-predicted what Ukraine would bring. They expected a lot of aggro, they brought full anti-aggro. Ukraine debated them by not bringing aggro for the first time, and I think Belgium will learn from that experience. Don't overcommit, don't completely adapt to what we expect our opponent to bring. And we'll probably go into it with a more balanced approach. And I think they just have a bit more tournament experience spread across all 3 players than Italy has, for example. And I give them the slight edge in this group.
I'm going to once again go with the same predictions you have done. But once again, in reverse, I think Belgium will take number 1 in this group. I think they've proved it over the last 2 EU Masters. I think Ultraman is a very, very good player. Shuki as well. Also, like you mentioned with Poland, they have their expertise in different deck archetype since a long time ago. And I think Redwinter, we'll see what he brings to the table. But overall, I think Belgium has always been kind of a very strong two-man team with, I believe it was Irvin in EU Masters 2 and in EU Masters 1, maybe also a different player, maybe also Irvin, I believe. But always has been Ultraman and Shuki as the kind of best performers in terms of seasonals, all this, and ladder, and just bringing all that knowledge and experience to the table, and always performing well. I think sometimes you have different players or teams that are very good individually, but then in this format they don't work and don't understand the format as well. They just bring the best decks, whatever it is. But Ultraman, or Belgium as a whole, has been a country that has always, I think, showed up maybe even higher than what you would expect from them in this format. They get like a bit of a boost. So I think Belgium number 1 and Poland number 2. But once again, I don't know. It's the group of death, so it is hard to. I think Italy and Sweden are very good teams, and I think they can prove a lot, especially Aaron on Sweden coming into this tournament, and Broken Ball coming back with Italy. But overall, I think Belgium and Poland are just too strong. Looking at past experiences and the players themselves to not have them as 1 and 2. But we'll see if we get any surprises, as usual in EU Masters. Is this anything else to add for Group B, Lobster? Or are we ready to move on to Group C?
I think I'm ready to move on. I think we talked about all the teams.
All right.
And the next one is also an interesting one. That's a very wild and spicy one. Take it away, Panda.
Moving on to Group C now, we're going to have France coming in as the number 3 seed in the qualifiers in the ladder stage. And we have Boise, I'm not entirely sure how you pronounce this one, but we'll figure it out before the tournament starts. Awizotl, who's also a difficult name, and then Den. Thank you, Den, for having a 3-letter name. That works perfectly. Lobster, okay, you're good, never mind. There was this pink stuff again, but you're fine. Then we have Russia, Ragnar Rosic, world's top 16 player, 05 WTF, and Carnality. 05 WTF is someone that I think was in the last edition as well of EU Masters, alongside Ragnar Rosic, are definitely a big name in the Russian scene. And then Carnality we know less about, but I think still a strong player, of course, with 481 LPs, so Russia was quite stacked. And we have Norway making a return after missing out on EU Masters number 2. They were there, of course, in EU Masters number 1, with much of the same team, with Marcus and with Trish Fangrel, 69. The Echo Uranium is a new player coming into the team, but I think they're catching up quickly. And of course, Norway had a bad showing the first 2 Masters, had kind of the France 0-5 or 0-6 or 1-5 in the end, showing in group stage. And it was a stacked group with UK and Czechia and Germany. I believe it was that Group D. So definitely they're trying to come back and prove that they can do better. I think they had some unlucky stuff, some bad play, of course, some big mace plays that we remember, I think, to some extent. But Marcus and Trish Fangrel are very strong players. They've proved it in seasonals. They made top 8s, top 4s for Trish Fangrel. And Marcus has, in community tournaments, done very well as well when he put his mind to it. So I think definitely can be a strong group. And then we have Morocco. Goda, DDY. I'm not sure if that's daddy or not, so I'm not going to go there, but
That's kind of daddy.
let's just go with DDY for now, or just Goda. Very strong player, has proved it in ladder this season with Draven Sion. Was the first player, or was number 1 in Masters, I think, for the longest time, basically, throughout this qualification period. Always like at 500 something LPs just so quickly, and then was just camping and chilling. So very strong player. And then Milabelos and Teenage Wasteland we know less about. We'll be kind of like sorry with Lebanon when they have this very strong superstar, and then the rest kind of that are just more, question marks. But we'll see how they perform in this group. So Lobster, right away, what are your initial thoughts looking at this Group C?
This group is the biggest question mark in my eyes, because most of the players are new, or at least a bit of wild cards. Like France entirely changed their lineup.
Yeah.
And although they were like rank 1 or 2 last EU Masters, and this time they're ranking 3rd on average LP again, expectations are high. But I'm not quite sure about the team synergy, because it's 3 new names, the familiarity with the format, and as well like the tournament experience. I know Den, the first European seasonal winner, can perform at peak capacity, but he's also taken a lot of time off of LoR, from what I've known over the last couple of months, or maybe even years, since he won that first seasonal tournament.
I don't know about years, Lobster. There's not been around for that long.
It's almost a year, right? The first season is already a long time ago. But point is, I think he returned to peak form. I've ran into him a couple of times on ladder. He played super clean. He's always been like top 10, top 20 on the ladder. And I think there's definitely a mixture of experience and skills there, but maybe not experience in this specific format, which is something that Norway, of course, has great advantage in. they are experienced in all kinds of tournament formats, and they probably have an increased desire to prove themselves and to at least make it out of groups, if not make a mark on the whole scene. And we all know that Marcus, the Fight Night legend, at peak capacity can play incredibly well. Trish Fanger has been making a showing on ladder and in seasonal tournaments consistently. And wildcard at Eki Uranium. We don't know what he brings or does not bring. Now, with Russia, it's a bit more interesting because Ragnar Rosic qualified as the #1 seed, but I'm not sure about you. I was not very impressed by the performance at the World's Championship. I think the piloting was a bit off. I also think the lineup almost looked like Ragnar Rosic didn't prepare at all. It looked a bit outdated. And here's the big question. I'm not sure if that was just like some real life stuff going on and maybe not having had the time to really prep the matchups that were coming up, or if it's something else. But if your team captain, if your highest ranked player is not playing at peak level, then it might get a bit harder for Russia. It's also a rather new team. I know O5 has some tournament experience, can definitely also bring it together, as well as carnality. That's why I'm saying this group is a full-on question mark. There's a lot of potential on every team, but also a lot of ifs.
I agree with
maybes. And Morocco is also the perfect example of this.
Yeah.
Gauda Daddy, I just call him Gauda Daddy. Probably the most consistent, the best ladder player this season so far. But how well can he translate this into tournament performance? And how well does this team complement each other? So I think this is the wildest group. Do you agree with these takes, Panda?
I agree completely. I think anything can happen here. Obviously, France has this idea of the last EU Masters, how they perform. So I don't know. I feel kind of weird if I break them as #1 because they're going to, do weird shit again. But like you mentioned, I think Den is someone that very, very strong player. I interviewed him for the player interviews that are going to be broadcasted in the breaks. He told me that obviously he has taken a break with Runeterra. He's gone into Hearthstone, all this again. But his goal for this tournament is to win it for France and be the first player to win a seasonal and a team tournament in Runeterra. So, and he's told me he's extra prepared. He's proven it on ladder playing Fizz Nami, not Zoe Nami. He's an expert on a deck that no one else is playing. This can mess up with matchups. This can mess up with prep. And he really rates this deck high, especially in the mirror match against Zoe Nami. So this might go into the lineup strategy. So I think France, and obviously, but we still don't know too much about, but Awizoto, we've seen him in seasonals. Just also a very strong player. Like you mentioned, all three of these players new to the format, so this can definitely affect things. But I think I respect Den a lot as a player. I think he's a very just good, talented mind when it comes to Runeterra. So I think he takes things seriously, and he knows he has this leadership role, I think, as well, from what I've been able to just see in interviews and stuff. And he's a player that I think is also just very good at predicting metas, deck building. I don't know. Maybe this is just speaking from anecdotes, but this is what it seems to me, at least. Russia, I agree with Ragnosich having a weird display at the Worlds. I'm not sure what the reasoning was. That being said, Russia qualified to top 4 rather, beat Poland in quarterfinals last EU Masters, and definitely impressed me there. And I think they have 2 of the returning players coming back for this one, so I think you can't count them out. Norway, again, they have to prove that they can perform under pressure and really have a good, showing this time around compared to the first time. When you mentioned Echo Uranium and what he brought to the table, I hope it's not Echo decks. That's all I was going to mention. I wanted to interrupt you. And then Morocco, I think, is not going to have a good time. I think I haven't seen enough of Goda in the last year. Like, sure, he had a very good showing in this ladder, playing 1 deck, but this is a 7-deck format. You have 2 other players that I'm not sure how much they're going to add in terms of expertise, in terms of experience and all this. I think it might be difficult for them to adapt to the EU Masters format and to have, a cohesive, strong 3-unit group, not just one player. And I think with Sari in Lebanon, it was a different case because Sari is a very, very, very good player and has very proven tournament experience and deck building and lineup building. But for Goda, I'm not sure how true that is. I'm not sure if it's just a one-time ladder performance that obviously really was very good on Draven Scion, or if it's more than that. So we can go into predictions. I think definitely, like you mentioned, the hardest group to predict. I think anything can happen, and I wouldn't be too surprised. But Lobster, who is your #1 seed getting out of this group?
All right, this might be a bit of a hot take, but I do believe in the perfect redemption arc. I think Norway is going to emerge as the victor here. And continuing on the redemption arc, both of the teams that had the worst group stage performances so far, the second team is going to be France, reversing, well, maybe not completely reversing from 0-6 to 6-0, but taking the second seed probably with like a solid 4-2 or 3-3 on tiebreakers. That being said, don't count the other two out yet. They're both incredible wildcards. I've seen Gouda Daddy practice a lot of different decks on ladder recently, being willing to sacrifice some LP to gain some experience there. But like you said, I'm not sure if it's going to be enough to keep up with the wealth of experience that Norway and France already have.
I'm going to go with France, number 1 seed. There's a few players in Runeterra's scene that I just blindly trust in terms of, just from what I've seen from their play, from just, from perception. I just immediately click as this is someone that has a lot of talent and just on all different fronts of what you need for success in a card game. And Den is one of those players for me. So I know he's been missing for a while. I know, all this stuff, but I think he can be the one to lead France to, once again, like you mentioned, a redemption arc. And for number 2, I want to go with Norway, but I'm going to go with Russia. I think I can't count them out after the last EU Masters. They performed very well. Regardless of what happened at Worlds, I think Ragnar is a very strong player. I think they're Russia, as well as a country, that I think there's a lot of national pride. And events like these, they really rally together. And I think, like you mentioned, there's a whole different community that Western players are not so used to, with Pedish being someone that we knew from seasonals, but had been crushing it in Russian tournaments and that kind of tournament scene for a while. And I think overall, people are always kind of underestimating the, Russia and Ukraine, like last EU Masters, and Russia specifically, I think. And they have what it takes, if they take it seriously, to perform very well in this format as well, with Ragnar having the experience and 05 as well. So I'm going to go with France and Russia as number 1 and number 2. But like I mentioned, and like you mentioned, I think this group is pretty up there in terms of what can happen. And this is the one where I'm most accepting that I will be completely wrong in my predictions, I think.
Absolutely. That's actually a great point that you make with Ragnar, who has already shown he can play at a world-class level. He might be hungry for redemption as well after that Worlds showing falling a bit short. Then, therefore, we basically have 3 teams that are really out to prove something. And Morocco even kind of also applies to that, even though in a different case as a newcomer. It's a very interesting group. I'm almost most excited for this one because anything can happen here.
And going into Group D, the group of the future winners of this EU Masters tournament, we have, for team number 1, the reigning champion, Turkey, coming back in without their captain. This tournament, I think the main, subject is big teams, no big captain. Like, all these captains are now missing. Salty Simon, Allen, and Grand Rodeo in this case as well. Not here for Turkey. We have Yucham Protein, which means flying protein. We'll get the backstory with his winner review, but now we're finally going to pronounce his name correctly. We have Mike Check and we have Tutus. Let's not go any further than that because that is a long and convoluted Turkish name. And from now on, it will be Tutus. And then for Spain, we have the same exact team as the last EU Masters. On paper, one of the most stacked teams, I think, alongside Czechia for me, 1 and 2, as just in terms of just density of strength, We have Sergi, we have Cosimo, world's top 8 player, and CDS Faul. The same exact team as last EU Masters. Then we have Romania coming back into the EU Masters tournament. They were there for the first one in the same group with Spain as well, with Croatia and with Belgium, I believe. Missed the second edition, missed the last edition, the Chronicles of Shurima, but are now coming back with Katasis, who is making a return, of course, as a team captain and just one of the very strongest players in Europe overall, alongside Hollow, who was also there for the first edition, and then a new player, Cross. And for the 4th team of this tournament, we have Serbia, their first time making it into EU Masters, with Baki as their team captain, someone who's been, I've caught him streaming a bit. I don't know how long he's been streaming for, but he's definitely caught my eye in the past, 2 weeks as someone who's consistently streaming now. And just, seems like a very strong player. And then we have Legolas and Nemi, who I know less about, who are kind of, I think this is one of those teams like Morocco that's like this very strong first player and then kind of, everyone else filling it out. And again, they could be very good players. They could just not use that much time to grind ladder, knowing that Boki would qualify them. And they could just be very strong as well, but we know less about them, and it's more of a question mark. Lobster, what are your first thoughts on this final group of the tournament?
First thoughts are the similarities between Romania and Serbia in this group. Not only looking at LP, but also at like the team distribution, basically. Like you said, the 1-star player in Katasis and Boki. Boki I've actually also known from seasonal top cuts. We've prepped a tiny little bit. Definitely a top tier contender. Katasis I've known since the early days. super consistent, creative, and definitely can lead a team of 3 players to some great success. The other players are a bit less known, but some names I've known from ladder and from tournaments or Discord groups, like, for example, Hollow. But yeah, these 2 teams kind of remind me a bit of like Morocco or maybe Lebanon, but just with more experience in their team captains. I do agree completely. Spain looks scary here. I also agree on the assumption that Spain and Czechia have the best balance of mechanical players paired with tournament experience and tournament skills. Cosimo just came from world's top 8, if I recall correctly. Very solid lineup. I thought he played pretty clean for the most time. It's always a bit debatable on those super high skill cap decks. No one really knows what the optimal play is, but definitely a solid pilot alongside Serhi, who has some of the most successful and consistent tournament runs throughout LoR's history. Also not afraid to switch the strategy of decks completely. We've seen Serhi play full-on control, full-on combo, full-on aggro even in one season where I think he reached the grand finals. And Faul has been around for a while as well. Definitely the first EU Masters. I don't quite know if also in the second. But like I said, so all 3 EU Masters, familiarity with the tournament format and everything. I think Spain has a favorite role. Turkey, previous winner, like you said, unfortunately without their captain. Gran Rodeo tweeted it out. He let his ego overtake him a little bit and really wanted to go for that team captain slot to push for rank 1, and then went on a losing stream and couldn't recover. Therefore, a new face, or rather 2 new faces even, but one familiar face, Uchan Protein, who probably also had a fair part of impact in their tournament win and looking to repeat that success. Definitely an interesting group.
I think Gran Rodeo is called pulling off a catasis when you're on on the final day and you just, a wire apparently just disconnects on your brain, your neural map, and says, all right, let's fucking grind, even though I'm qualified right now, for no reason. And then they just missed qualification. Catasis was even worse because obviously he doomed all of Romania, and there was strikes on the streets after this blunder on the second EU Masters. But he's made it back, obviously, in this group as well. Very unfortunate for Gran Rodeo. I think he's learned his lesson. I think for something like this, the skill of patience and camping on the last day of ladder is something that players have learned over the last 3 editions, because it is very important, of course. One loss can really doom everything, and then it just snowballs into more and more losses. And I was very sad, I think, to see Gran Rodeo miss. I think he's a great personality, not just player, for the game and for the tournament like this one as well, in terms of creating rivalries and storylines and all this. But he is missing here. Going into predictions, or actually, let's talk a bit more about Spain, because I have spoken to Sergi. Cosimo did, of course, make it to top 8. Sergi was prepping with him for this tournament, so they already have weeks of prep together and with Faul. Sergi and Faul have been working together and prepping together as practice partners for a long time, so there's this cohesion of results, cohesion of deck building and lineup building, expertise on many different archetypes, like you mentioned, and overall, just they already have all their homework done from the past 2 weeks, so they're even in better form going into this one in terms of prepping a 7-deck lineup and knowing what the meta looks like and everything, and just 3 very strong players. Faul, we saw him in Lee Sin in that meta, was very good on this deck. He's been in every single EU Masters with different players in the first one, with Nuzwick and with Raxitos. But EU Masters 2 and 3, the same core, and this is, I think, now the dream team of Spain. Also, they worked very well in the first one. They didn't make it to top 8 for unknown reasons, but I think they still played well and performed well and had a good read on the lineup. But they had a weird group with Russia and Ukraine, and just overall, it was pretty strong, actually, looking back at it. Hopefully, I think they can perform in this one. But let's go into predictions. Lobster.
All right. My number 1 favorite in this one, and one of the favorites in the tournament, is going to be Spain. I think they have all, like on paper, they have everything they need to go far. One thing I do want to mention here, though, is what I previously said about Salty Simon and Sweden in the last edition of the tournament. Because watching the World Championship, at least in Cosimo, I did think I saw a bit of tilt, which might have impacted the performance, or at least the decision-making a little bit. Spain is generally known as a country to be very enthusiastic, fuego, and I hope they just can control the emotions a bit, stay focused, even if RNG is not going their way. And I think if they do that, then there's nothing in their way, well, except for RNG maybe, that can stop them from coming out of this group and maybe taking over and running over this whole tournament.
Number
For
two?
the second seed, yeah. It's a tough one. I will personally lean towards the previous champion, Turkey, but I think all three of the other teams are fairly evenly matched. The thing is, the LP discrepancy is a bit higher, but on Turkey's side, we also have Uchan as the, let's say, captain with more experience and very consistent ladder finishes. The other two are not quite as known, although I at least know Mike Check fairly well from ladder and tournaments, and he definitely is a very strong mechanical player. Tutush I haven't run into a lot, so I can't say that much. I think Turkey on average is just going to be a step ahead in both experience and like creativity as well as mechanical play in front of the other two countries. But again, it's close. This one's definitely a close one.
I'm going to go with my number one to finish this group as the number one seed will be Spain. I think they're the favorites to win it all for me alongside Czechia. I think those are the two best teams for me in this tournament. And for number two, I'm going to go with Romania. I think Itas is a very strong player. I think he's hungry to prove it in this tournament as well. I think Hall is also a very strong player. And I think Turkey missing Grand Rodeo might be a detriment in terms of, expertise with different archetypes, in terms of just general experience overall. I think he was the number one most experienced player for Turkey. Although the results weren't really there for seasonals and top cuts and everything before U Masters, no Turkish player had really cemented themselves in the kind of the elite of Europe. But Grand Rodeo was the one that was closest to doing so, I think. I've always seen him on ladder as a very strong player. Uchan Protein as well, but I don't know. I think they're going to be missing Grand Rodeo a lot for many reasons. And I don't know. I think Atasis is a very strong player, and I think he can carry this team to a good performance and make it as top two. But again, these three teams, Spain, Turkey, and Romania, are kind of up in the air, whereas Serbia is a wild card, have a chance to upset. Of course, with the EU match, we've seen all kinds of things happen. I think it's very unpredictable, and every time we're going to get, I don't know, I think Lobster, we're going to have maybe 4 out of 8 predictions right this tournament, and that would be us being lucky, because shit goes down. I don't know why, but shit goes down in EU Masters. But these are, I think, my final predictions. So overall, we were pretty even all across the board, except for a few discrepancies for number 2 seeds in Group C and D. But yeah, I guess we just know a lot about the teams are going off stats and going off names. But again, anything can happen, I think, in the EU Masters format. We are now 40 minutes into the video. We're going to go into the most decks used to climb and the more deck aspect and meta aspect of the video. Now that we've gone through all the groups and you guys know all the players and all the countries competing, which I think is going to be a nice preview going to the tournament. Will be nice to have all that information. But there we go. Most decks used to climb. One quick note here. This is off a Google Forms response sheet that players gave to GG Tech and to myself for just a lot of information across the board about the players and background info. So this is not, purely correct data. I think Stratos was trolling, saying Timo Caitlyn. So we're going to, put an asterisk on that one. I think he didn't actually climb with that in the last week. But for everyone else, I'm going to assume they were trustworthy and gave us the right answer. So right away, the first thing to note, we have all the different players and all the decks they've used. I think we're not going to analyze that specifically because it might just take too long. But I can just slowly, you can pause the video and you can see if you're very curious about a specific player. But looking at the decks used in total, we have Zoe Nami leading the pack with 14 out of the 48. We have Ping City leading the pack, or not leading the pack, second in the pack, the Beta Wolf with 11. The one in parentheses, it is Joe Lamparci was playing the more control-y version with Harpoon and Dreadway and just same deck but a bit slower. Then we have Draven Scion as the top, to round out the top 3. Ziggs Poppy, 4 players use this deck. This is the last week or last few days of climbing, the most important days. So this is when Ziggs Poppy was becoming a thing and kind of taking the same role as Pink City as this aggro, very good deck to just stomp, decks that don't have healing with in the last few days. 3 players on Zoe Lee, 3 players on the Lulu Poppy Rally, 2 players on Bandle Tree, 2 players on Feel the Rush, both part of Team Romania, Katasis and I believe Cross. So both players, trying to counter Pink City and the aggro decks to some extent. Then 1 player on Draven Caitlyn was Badge Attack, 1 player on Timo Caitlyn, Asterisk, Stratos, I'm not sure about that one, and 1 player on Pirate Aggro who was I'm So Humble. He saw Aaron qualifying with $500. He's like, all right, I have to get into this, top 3 into Masters. He just climbed from Plat in like 4 days, just playing the good old Pirate Aggro, not even the Pink City, and made it in. So right away, Lobster, what are your initial thoughts on this deck distribution for the final week of qualification?
Just first of all, let me give a shout out to Stratos God real quick, and I think it might be true because if we remember the LP distribution in Belarus, he finished at 70 LP, which might explain the team. Okay,
so maybe he's not trolling. Sorry for dragging your name through the dirt, Stratos, but right away you can clearly see that there's one deck, that doesn't fit into the other 48.
The outlaw, basically. Yeah. Who knows? Maybe not. It's also not that important because that's not going to make a splash on the tournament meta, actually. Main difference here is this, of course, is all... This, of course, is all ladder meta, and it's vastly different from the tournament meta. Ladder meta is just one perfect, well-rounded deck that can beat everything. And in this tournament meta, we'll have targeted bans, and we can go way greedier at targeting certain stuff, especially with the mind games of banning, predicting your opponent's picks. Mm-hmm. One thing that both formats have in common, which is very interesting, is closed deck list format. And we'll get into that a bit more later on. But Zoe Nami, Pink City, Draven Scion as the 3 strongest decks, I think there's no surprise there. I think they have established themselves as very well-rounded decks with a very wide matchup spread and kind of have game into almost every matchup. And the other ones are a bit wild. Like Zoe Lee has always been a high-skill cap, high-skill agency favorite that performs better in tournaments than ladder usually. This might even see more play. Ziggs Poppy is something that can be annoying to see in a lineup because you don't really expect your opponent to pick it, but if they do, it might just auto-win some matchups. And I think overall, what we can say about this deck distribution is that it's more narrow than the tournament meta will be. Fiznami, Dan, that's absolutely true.
One small mistake.
Gotta give a shout out to Dan here for climbing to the top of the European ladder with a more or less original list of his own. But yeah, I think this is more centered around 5-6 lists in total. I think in the tournament meta, we will still see the powerhouses like Zoe Nami, Pink City, Draven Scion in almost any lineup. But I think the rest could be way more variety depending on the strategy of the whole lineup. If you want to target something specifically, or if you go for some creative brews, right? Because the deck lists are hidden, you can take so much advantage. And I think there could be an emergence of certain meta counters that are very hard to predict. Like, for example, Stony Suppressor in Demacia decks, as a hidden tech, your opponent looking at the lineup doesn't know whether or not they play them, and that can single-handedly swing Nami matchups, for example, or Draven Caitlyn matchups to an extent. Other cards would be Despair in any Shadow Isles deck. It's really hard to play against. Or if you see your opponent play a Lee Sin deck, you have no idea how many denies they play, if any, or how many bastions they play to counter Minimorphs and Freezes. And you don't know if you want to play your Fielder Rush into the Lee Sin deck or not, because they might have 0 denies, they might have 2 or 3, and like Palms and Willis and so on. I think the tournament meta is going to be vastly different, but some of the powerhouses are going to stay the same. I'm very curious if you agree there, Panda.
Yeah, of course. I think this is completely different. We can't compare this list to the actual tournament decks. It's a 7-deck lineup. It opens up the format even more than in just seasonals, or it's the widest format there is. We've seen very weird stuff happening in the last few matches with Zeta Lucid, with all kinds of different decks, and obviously just a certain deck or archetype just with different variations of it. We saw the Zoe, Vi, and then 2 Zoe decks and kind of the strategy. Let's look again. Looking at last few matches, the strategy there was these big 3 decks that were very different, but all very strong across the board. Watcher, Azurelia, and Thrashnasis, and then everything else. And players, a lot of the lineup strategy was revolving around this meta with these big 3, and then everything else around it, and how you could kind of take it to your advantage. Will it be the same going to this tournament? We'll have to see, with Zoe Nami and Draven Scion being the big 2, I think, with different matchup tables completely, almost opposite, let's say. Feel a Rush coming in for Katasis as a counter to aggro decks. Are there enough good decks that counter aggro decks? That's another question. Is it just going to be Ziggs Poppy, Bandle City, Pirate aggro, like all these different decks in a row that are all aggro? Maybe. Do other aggro variants that are less played, like spiders and this Noxus Bandle City with just random aggro cards, make a splash in as well? We've seen kind of when you go into an archetype and you go into a strategy, and you have to go deep into this archetype, you have to go past the best 2 or 3 decks and dig deeper into things that are not played at all in ladder anymore because they're just not worth it. But if you're going for full aggro like Italy did last EU Masters, it might be the case. It would be some weirder aggro lists that have been forgotten for a while with spiders and different more obscure lists. So with tournament as well, I think you have to go into things like Ezreal Shellfolk with Vi. As a potential. We saw Alan perform very well with it. As a in the 7-deck lineup, these weirder decks might make it in. Silver Auction, of course, with Demacia. We'll see maybe making a splash, of course, as well. Any other decks that you would consider that would make it into it as a tournament deck, but not a ladder deck?
Absolutely. I think there's a lot more. For example, Darkness. I don't see a single person play here, but they have been, like Pokrovac and Jimmy, who we have been holding the rank 1 and 2 spot.
Jimmy's not in the EU Masters, but yes, Pokrovac.
yeah, that's true. But he still managed to rank first or second in EU like these last couple of days, going up and down the ladder. Darkness definitely a potential very high performing deck. And I'm actually curious to see. I think some Vi deck is definitely going to make a splash. It might be Ezreal Shellfolk. It might be a re-emergence of like Zoe Vi, just due to the access to Equinoxes to counter Lost Soul decks, for example. I generally think that some Targon deck might be interesting just because of Sunburst as a meta counter, as well as Equinoxes, which do pretty well into some matchup. And of course, the anti-aggro capabilities that Targon often has.
Anything else looking at different region pairings? Let's try and think through it and see, do you think Scouts will make any kind of a return? Maybe with Stony Suppressor?
It's an option. I think some version of Stony Suppressor Demacia could see play. I'm not saying I'm guaranteeing it, but I think a common strategy for lineups could be either ban Draven Scion and have good matchups into Nami, or ban Nami, have good matchups into Draven Scion. Or the most obvious one, of course, would be to ban those 2 decks because they're arguably the strongest in a nutshell.
Reminder, we are not banning decks in EU Master, we're banning champions. And I think Draven will be the #1 most banned champion, eliminating any kind of Lost Soul archetype. Obviously, you're not going to bring Scion without Draven. Just doesn't make sense. Draven does too much for the deck in terms of discards. And yeah, it would be a hit on Draven Caitlyn, Draven Ezreal, Draven Scion, and maybe other aggro strategies with Draven as well, possibly. I saw Ruben playing some kind of Zoe Draven deck. That's kind of a flashback from some Targon aggro deck we saw in the past. So Draven, I think, might be the #1 most banned champion going into this tournament.
I think I agree with you on this one. It's either going to be Draven or Nami, depending on what the best strategy for 7-deck format actually looks like. I think, generally speaking, the meta is going to be very fast for the most part because of the emergence of a lot of strong fast decks, aggro decks especially, but also because you can build multiple decks that are fairly similar and only exchanging the champions. You already mentioned yourself, the Poppy Ziggs is a great example of a very efficient aggro deck that is not centered around the champions. Technically, you could replace Poppy and Ziggs with like Teemo. You
Iron
can also
Ballista.
just play Iron Ballista, yes.
Yeah.
Almost the same, right?
This is like Shurima Burn in the last edition, where you could play with Azir, you could play without Azir. It wasn't a big deal because it's just every other card is just meant to go face, and you get there eventually with Teemo or with Draven or with different, not Draven I think, but like you mentioned, yeah, it might just be an aggro list that has the same region combo, just different champions, because you are banning champions in this format, not decks or regions.
Exactly. And if I recall correctly, Italy had an interesting approach of going like 1 deck with triple Azir, 1 with 1 or 2 Darius, and 1 Shurima Burn Champless, which is 3 times almost the same deck, but you can't ban all 3 of them, so you can ensure that you play one of those. Of course, the decks on average are going to be slightly weaker, but if you want to target a certain matchup, they still get the job done. So I think we'll just generally see creativity with aggressive strategies.
Going by regions, do you think we'll see Xerath Zillion at all? Or is it too oddly positioned for this kind of format?
It's a very good question. I think in a nutshell, it's a bit too weak to see a lot of play, like in a vacuum. And it gets outperformed by aggro a bit, but we could maybe see it as like be played once, twice, maybe 3 times. Just like, for example, the elusive Z deck last time worked wonders. As a one-off, we saw that once, and it worked perfectly against Nasus and got a win and basically determined the outcome of the series. And maybe this could be a similar story here.
Ezreal Karma?
Ooh.
Mirai Karma?
Mirai Karma, let's go. I was gonna say, some Karma deck could see play. You can go Karma ? Especially if people start picking up Field Rush again, right? And then you see a Karma in your opponent's lineup and you start to panic and you don't know, like, oh, do I ban this? Is that enough of a reason for me to not queue my deck? Another thing we could definitely see is some Catalog of Regrets deck or some version of Gohard, whether it's TF Gohard or Catalog of Regrets Gohard. Gohard, of course, is generally good into aggressive strategies, and if we expect a lot of players to be wide on aggressive decks, we just ban the 2 control-ish decks and farm everything else with Gohard, Field Rush, and the likes.
Yeah, those are all valid options. That again, because it's a wide format, there might be decks that aren't going to be in every single lineup, but they can make a surprise showing as a comfort pick, possibly even for some players. As just when you're, again, I've talked about it before, when you're doubling up on a certain strategy, where you have to, anti-aggro, aggro, mid-range board. We've seen all these different strategies used before in all the EU Masters. You have to go not just 2 or 3 decks deep into that, strategy with the best performing decks, which are usually the ones that we all know very well, that are on ladder as well, because they're just the best decks for that, game plan. But also just, you have to go 6 or 7 decks deep, and then you're getting into, oh shit, I guess I have to bring Karma, I have to bring Go Hard Catalog, I have to go more creative with the options you're bringing because you're targeting specific strategy. Maybe against a team that's playing aggro, you're going to go anti-aggro, so we can see some very weird stuff. Plunder we haven't seen in the decks used for the qualifier can make a showing, I think, as well. Although, using Gangplank, that's one of the difficulties of banning champions, you're going to have to use Gangplank in both Pink City and in this deck, and that might be a problem, obviously, so we might see decks less because of this as well, taking this rule into account. So a lot of variables to keep in mind for this format that can be very different, but let's go with a Plunder ? Are there any other decks that we are missing that could see play, that could make a splash, that are kind of on our radar, but not, beeping very wildly, let's say?
I think we already called out all the more obvious choices. Great addition of Plunder, by the way. It's fairly well balanced. It can definitely make splashes in some lineups.
If you're playing like a mid-range type archetype, like game plan, then Plunder would be obviously one of the, not even a top 5 deck to put in it, but like a top 3 even. So definitely, but again, the champion restrictions is going to make things a bit weird, for sure.
Yeah.
Overwhelm?
Maybe like Overwhelm and for example TF Swain are some of the decks that have always made some showings, but they kind of got power crapped. I'm not sure if they can compete anymore in this expansion. I would rather expect some newer archetypes to emerge rather than these old ones to show up again. Especially looking at, for example, Shihu playing in this tournament, we saw the creativity at the World's Championship level. Maybe we'll see some bonkers Heimerdinger or Victorless or something to make seemingly unplayable champions playable just because they have good matchups into something. So I think Targon Andal or Targon PNZ could actually make some surprise appearances in general. But we already kind of covered that in Zoe Vi and Invoke Control.
Yeah. I think we've covered most of all regions, most of all possibilities. Again, this is just general talking points to go over certain things. But like Lockper mentioned, we're not the ones that are trying to qualify to group stage. It's going to be the teams in the different countries trying to formulate wacky ideas, off-the-wall ideas, obscure ideas to give them a bit of an edge going into it, or just, players playing comfort picks and playing the best possible stuff with a certain strategy, and we'll see most of, obviously, the obvious answers and obvious decks. But I think, we can always expect some surprises. We've seen it in every U Masters. We saw it at Worlds even, with a smaller format with only 3 decks, so I think it's definitely a meta that allows for a lot of experimentation, a very diverse meta, and I am really looking forward to what is going to come here for EU Masters, because it's, I think, the best position. Compared to last meta, it was terrible, but even then it was still a fun tournament. So this meta, I think, even better. Let's go back to this screen because I think we're almost done here. We're almost going to reach an hour as well. Lobster, any closing thoughts on the tournament we have? Let's go for 1 more minute until we end this.
All right. Just one last thought that appeared to my mind. What do you think about Deep?
Deep is probably not going to make it. It kind of sucks ass. But
you're
maybe,
probably right.
Maybe there's a chance.
It's a fan favorite.
Yeah.
And it's...
But it's not a favorite in EU Masters. It's performed pretty badly on stream, especially. So I'm not sure we'll see too much of that. Quick notice as well. I'll leave links to the Reddit thread with more player info in the description. We have two new casters, Sparkling Iced Tea and Caster Gem, joining us for the broadcast team as well for this tournament. So very excited for that as well. And tournament starts tomorrow, Thursday at 5 p.m. CEST. We have some weekday group stage days now. Those will be starting at 5 p.m. and the weekend ones always at, I think it's 12 or 1 a.m. or noonish, basically. So stay on top of that. But I'll leave all that information in the description in the Reddit thread as well. So stay tuned for that. Anything else, Lobster, you want to add before we go?
No, just that I'm hyped. It's about to start, and I'm very excited. Over the next 3 weeks, or rather the next 3 weekends, all this action is going to play out. Keep an eye out on the schedule. It's a bit irregular because of seasonal tournaments and other Riot esports titles as well having tournaments on these weekends. So trying to not have everything at the same time. Keep an eye out on the schedule. And yeah, I'm very hyped for this one.
4 days of group stage from now, Thursday to Sunday, to start things off. Next week, we'll have the last 2 days of group stage. Then next weekend, quarterfinals, and then I believe finals on that same weekend on Sunday. So 3 weeks total for this competition. Most weekends, some weekdays, Thursdays, and Fridays as well. And Magua and I will be casting tomorrow for day one. So stay tuned for that. Thank you guys for watching the video. Hope you guys enjoyed. A bit hectic, but I hope the presentation was interesting, at least with the live editing and the emotes and stuff. I think it was. But I hope you guys enjoyed. We'll be doing maybe a recap video next week. Why not? Of the first 4 group stage days, possibly. Me and Lobster. Maybe someone else joins us as well. And maybe Progress Day. Mogwai teased it a bit as well on Twitter, so I think Lobster and I will be part of that as well soon. So stay tuned to Mogwai's channel. But that will be all for us this week and today. Hope you guys enjoyed. Take care.